We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by Line Movement. Joining us, as always, to talk through some wide receiver sleepers. Of course, he's the Reception Perception creator. You know him from Yahoo Sports. Matt Harmon, how was your week 15, my man? It was an eventful one for me, but I think people are tired of me talking about it, so I want to hear how yours was.
I was going to lead in talking about you, man. So, I love to see anytime my guy Stephon Diggs can make a big week for you. That brings me far more joy than any good things happen to me, man. So, yeah, it was a fun week. Most of my good teams had a bye in terms of, like, season-long teams. Couple got bumped out. Definitely wish I had played Gus Edwards over DeAndre Washington in the Dynasty League, but nevertheless, here we are. We're moving on. This is where the real kings will be made this week.
I can tell people that are like really in on like the season long weeds because the excitement when they get on the show for week 15, it's like this is like ride or die time. You make it to the finals or you don't, right? So this is a big week, man. I'm excited to chat with you about some wide receivers. I think that a couple guys off the top that make a lot of sense to talk about are ones that are going to be popular this week, but ones that people might be a little bit down on. So let's talk about Chark for a second because he's someone that like always seems to be popping in like the air yards and that sort of stuff. But one thing that I'm trying to make very clear to people is that not all air yards are created equal. Obviously, the quarterback situation in Jacksonville right now. So let's talk about Chark a little bit. It seemed like you might be on him this week.
Yeah, I feel like this is a good week to get back in, obviously, because, like you said, most people are out. It's not been a great run. He did have that big play in Jake Luton's first start against the Houston Texans, but I think during the Glennon era, if we can call it that in Jacksonville, things were rough. Things were brutal there. But like you said, since week 8, he still has a 36% share of the team air yards when he's been playing. The usage has been there. I do still think he's a quality deep threat. I came into the year saying he's probably not a traditional true number one receiver. When you look at his ability to separate all over the field, he's more of a zone beater than a man beater or a guy that gets off against press. So I don't know that he necessarily needs to function as a team's alpha, right? We can say that for sure. However, getting Gardner Minshew back, I think, is a big deal. I do think Minshew's the guy who is going to target him appropriately on some of the shorter and intermediate routes that he produces on, and he separates really well with. So even in a matchup against Baltimore, which on paper, Baltimore has a tough defense, we know that. They do still have talented cornerbacks, although those guys are dealing with injuries. They didn't necessarily play well last time we saw them against the Browns. And more importantly, this front seven, like the pass rush for Baltimore, I think is still I don't know that it's coming back to the unit that we were seeing early in September or even October. Obviously, we know they had a bunch of COVID issues. Calais Campbell is an awesome player, but he's kind of playing like a former version of himself, a shell of himself right now. So I'm not too scared of this Baltimore defense. I think Minshew being back for Chark is actually a pretty big deal.
I'm with you on that. I think that the volume has been there, but like getting a guy that truly trusts him down the field, he's going to be like sub 5% owned. So this is a sleeper segment, Matt. Yeah. So you're bringing the heat right off the bat. This next situation is one that I'm really tired of talking about. This like T.Y. Hilton versus Houston narrative. I'm not surprised that you're probably on the Pittman side of this, but if you want to tell the people, it seems like there's been a slight role change maybe with Ty, but I'd rather take your opinion on that than just what you hear on Twitter, man. Twitter's the worst.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And look, I feel like this Colts offense is just, there's no top guy. There's no one big dog. And Frank Reich has said that he's going to call plays that way. And we've seen when this offense is at its most optimal, it's kind of playing things on a week-by-week basis. So they're getting a lot of guys involved. They use Naheem Hines as like a man beater on the outside, which you don't see from a running back position. They obviously use Pittman really well on these like crossing routes. He's a big-time athlete. He's a player who can win out in space. I love this guy in the future, and I think the way they found a way to use him with Phillip Rivers. Like in a theoretical world where the Colts have this big-time pocket passer, get out on the move, can rifle things downfield, then I think we're going to see a more complete version of Pittman. But the way that they're using him with Phillip Rivers, which just makes a ton of sense, is just to hit him on those crossing routes like we used to see with Keenan Allen and Phillip Rivers. Those guys made a ton of production, made a ton of music on those plays, and that's how they're using Pittman. I like that a lot, and sure, T.Y. Hilton has absolutely popped right now. And I think that's actually great to see because it's not necessarily that I think T.Y. is a different player than he was maybe in the prime of his career. They're just not using him that way because really that's not how Rivers can operate at this point. Rivers right now, too, is underrated. He's fourth in EPA per play since week 10. He's been playing really well, and that's despite the fact that he has a foot injury. But who cares with Phillip Rivers, right? Because it's not as if this is a guy that can move at all. He has a very defined box where he can function on the field. And again, I think that fits well with what Pittman's doing right now. So sure, the narrative about T.Y. Hilton and the Texans, it's a thing, right? Because it does seem to pop up every time he plays this team. However, I think we still need to pay attention to Pittman as a guy that's playing well, that's playing a lot of snaps, and I love the way that they're using him given his quarterback.
Yeah, I think the quarterback stuff probably isn't talked about enough with even just like trying to figure out that this offense functions totally differently when it did when T.Y. Hilton was, I guess, in his prime overall. So I'm with you. I think that I still want to be on the younger, more talented wide receiver, but it just lately at least continues to bury me. So in terms of this next situation, we've got some situations to talk about because I think finding these cheaper wide receivers in these offenses that we think are going to have some success could be the key to this entire week. So just looking at someone like Michael Gallup versus CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb is at 4,500. Gallup is a little bit cheaper, but San Francisco has just been getting absolutely shredded by slot wide receivers. So I think that Lamb is the guy here, but a lot of people are talking up Gallup just probably a little bit because of the price, but maybe a little bit more of a big threat as well down the field.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the price is what's always going to make Gallup attractive because he hasn't been the steady producer this year. We saw against the Ravens when these teams played on Tuesday night a couple of weeks ago that when Gallup wins, we know it's still going to be big time, right? It's going to be in the end zone in contested situations, and it's going to be down the field. I just don't know that you want to throw into the teeth of this 49ers defense, which is down the field, because they are getting healthier back there. They're still playing pretty well. I mean, it's one thing for Josh Allen to go out there and tear up the 49ers defense. It's another thing to ask Andy Dalton to do it behind an offensive line that's still taking its lumps, from an injury perspective. They still need to really rebuild that unit. So, yeah, it absolutely lines up this week. I think this is kind of how you have to play this Cowboys receiver core. I feel like we've adjusted to that at this point. Back when it was Dak, you can basically test any of these guys because that's how well this passing offense is functioning. When it's Dalton back there, it's definitely better than the Gilbert or DiNucci, quarterback carousel. But nevertheless, we still have to play the matchup game. And I agree, San Francisco's definitely been getting thumped by these slot receivers, by guys over the middle of the field. That is the way that I would go, and that, of course, does lead you back to CeeDee Lamb. I think if you're going to target a Cowboys receiver between Gallup and Lamb, you're probably going to go with the rookie here.
Yeah, San Francisco is last in the league at 6.6 yards per attempt to slot wide receivers, giving up 7 touchdowns as well to that area of the field. So I think that's super interesting. One other thing that I wanted to mention as well as we transition into this other situation is if you haven't checked out the matchups video with Rich Rebar, going to throw a card up right here for you guys to check that one out. But we talked about this Kansas City and New Orleans game pretty at length. One thing that we've said is it's a little bit different in this KC offense than it has been in past years. It is so condensed, but Sammy Watkins versus McCole Hardman, are either of these guys in play, or is it just a little bit too thin because everything is going to Kelsey, everything is going to Tyreek Hill right now?
Yeah, I do kind of think it's thinner, and we also have to account for the fact that Clyde Edwards-Helaire pass is still, that's still a factor of this offense. I don't want to play any of these Chiefs running backs at all because, number one, they don't run the ball much at all, which why would you when you have Patrick frickin' Mahomes? I'd rather just throw the ball. I'd rather keep things short in the passing game. And number two, they're not a very good rushing team. Mitchell Schwartz has been absent from most of this season. That's been a problem on the offensive line. We know they're not a good short yardage team. So I'm not saying that the Chiefs running game is what's going to take away from some of these pass catches. At this point of the season, they're just not playing that way. But CH catches 5 passes last week. That's going to take away from some of these ancillary wide receivers. And I agree, they're just so concentrated between Kelsey and Hill. And again, why would you not be? Those are two literal game-changing talents. Kelsey might lead the NFL this year in receiving yards as a tight end. That's insane. And I don't even want to hear about the fact that he's just a big receiver or whatever. No, it's an insane thing for him to do at that position to lead the NFL in receiving yards. But if I was to go thin with these Chiefs receivers here, I would go with Hardman because I think Watkins is at this point in his career, I don't think he is a good vertical receiver really at all anymore. I mean, sure, do they sometimes run him on go routes to open up the field for other players? Absolutely. We know that that's something that they'll do with Sammy Watkins, but when he's been effective as a Kansas City Chief, it's been when they can hit him on crossing patterns. It's been when they can pile targets his way on short and deeper dig routes. I don't think that's going to happen in this version of the Chiefs offense, and that's important. Last year, when Watkins would pop up for big games, or even his first year with the Chiefs, it was because they were able to funnel him a lot of targets on those routes. Again, with the way they're pummeling things to Kelsey and to Hill, I don't see Watkins ever getting that volume. I do think Hardman, of course, can make big plays with just a single touch. I don't think Watkins is that type of guy at this point in his career anymore. I'm not advocating for people to play really either one of these guys, but if you are in a position where you want to play one of these Chiefs cheaper receivers, I think you got to go with Hardman at this point.
So the last kind of mess, I think, at wide receiver is going to be a game that you kind of have to get right on this slate. This Philadelphia and Arizona game, there's a lot of really cheap options. Obviously, both quarterbacks of the rushing variety. So maybe the answer is none of these guys. But I think in this type of if you're looking to game stack Philadelphia and Arizona, we've got Christian Kirk, we've got Larry Fitzgerald, we've got Ward, Rager, Jeffrey. Like, do any of these guys stand out of that group of these like cheaper wide receivers in the Philadelphia and Arizona game?
Jeez, man. I mean,
it's rough.
That Eagles receiver core, yeah, it's tough, right? Because these are probably two of the most, beyond DeAndre Hopkins, like take Hopkins out of it for a minute. The rest of this Arizona depth chart, the rest of this Eagles depth chart is probably one of the most disappointing units in the NFL, especially because the Eagles aren't playing Fulgham at all anymore for whatever reason. I don't get it. I feel like they barely get it, but that is the way they're going about this receiver core at this point. Rager, to me, we're talking about all of these good young rookie receivers. I mean, Brandon Ayuk is a player that is producing as an alpha right now, and he's the one guy that I had the most questions about in the first round. But Rager, at this point, he's just not playing well. And I think maybe it's because he's been banged up all year. There's been a lot of injuries. But when you just watch him play, he's not getting a lot of separation. He's not cutting on his routes sharply. And that's just a part of the problem of this offense is that they're trying to use him as that number one receiver, and it's just not working out. I think if you want to target an Eagles receiver, I do think Greg Ward makes some sense because of the way Jalen Hurts is going to play. Those slot routes can break off quickly when he's scrambling. I would prefer to go that direction. We also know that Arizona has definitely been weaker against slot receivers than probably the outside receivers this year. So again, I think that makes some sense. On the Arizona side, man, I mean, there's plenty of opportunity for Christian Kirk. This Eagles team is one that you can beat on defense, no doubt about it. But I mean, Kirk has just been a disappointment this year. Outside of one small stretch of the year, I just don't know that he's in his most optimal position. They really need to add another receiver this year to play that flanker spot so that they can move these guys around him more, maybe put Kirk in the slot. I just don't know that he's suited to be a down in, down out, outside receiver at one spot of the field. It's just I wouldn't go that direction.
All right, I'm with you. That was probably the toughest thing I've ever thrown at you because I threw a bunch of junk at you, but it seems like we might have found something in Ward there in that game. Yeah, so I like it, man. Appreciate you, Matt Harmon. Everyone, make sure you follow him on Twitter. He's at Matt Harmon _BYB. Hey, it's championship week on DraftKings this week, Harmon. So hopefully I'm pretty happy after, this week overall. One of my clients has 4 seats in the DraftKings live final, so it should be a lot of fun to sweat his teams. Michael Leone, obviously from our show on Sunday nights, also has a seat in the live final. So maybe he'll have a big $2.5 million hit. That would make my 60K one look pretty small, man. So best of luck in week 15, man. Hopefully you're talking about some championship kind of teams that you have coming into week 16 here.